So guys, that's the proper prior planning prevents poor performance of, or also known as the 6 Ps. So now we go to another we need to also take consideration the following, no. The planning phase may take various forms. Typically also it includes here we bulleted some of the items here. So the first one or the first bullet is a planning memorandum or checklist to document the audit approach and judgments made. So most likely in the planning phase, no, as much as possible, we want everything in order. So don't make it ano, you'll be having the planning memorandum to be attached to the working program. And at the same time, the checklist. A checklist is a list of to-dos wherein if you are going to do a task, no, naandun siya yung mga need mong gawin na procedures. So that is a checklist, no. We do not guarantee that if we are or we have already performed all the items listed in the checklist, no, it doesn't guarantee na the audit is already complete. No, it will really matter on your professional judgment if you see to it that your and I mean the procedures that you perform would be sufficient to cover the or would be sufficient to cover the audit the audit objective that you have laid down initially in your work program. Okay, then also, for the second bullet, no, flow charts or narrative write-ups describing key process flow. So most likely, if the process or procedures is very, very long, no, let's say for example, it involves uh a number of pages or narratives, it is better to document it using flowcharts. So I think in your accounting information system, you are familiar with different kinds of flowcharts. So we have system flowcharts, program flowcharts. So it will be up to the auditors on what documentation type would they be what do you call this using in capturing or understanding the operations or the business operations of a certain organization or specifically a certain business unit. Okay. So for the next bullet also, you can also consider here the or well include the risk map that depicts the judgment made regarding process level risk. So when you say risk map, uh you assess, no, in what is the or what are the risks involved in that certain process, and then what are the risk rating provided in the certain process. So you will be knowing ano ba yung areas na would be needing more substantive test and what would be needing less test, no, yung mga tipong ganon. Okay. You can also include here the RCM or the risk and control matrix that documents the link between the risk, the controls, testing approach, results of testing, and testing conclusion. So remember that you are creating a test plan on sa work program, right? In there, you can include there the RCM. In there, no, you assess the risk, no, and then of course when you assess the risk, 'di ba, you test that the 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 related controls and you provide some risk rating, no? Yun yung risk control matrix. Okay? And then of course included there also is the testing conclusion, no? Ano yung results ng test mo over the process that you have tested in assessing the risk and its related control. Diba your control, you need to assess the control design and its implementation. Okay? And also included here it's the audit plan. Okay. And in relation to audit plan, we now go to the annual audit plan. No, in cooperation with the senior management, no, the auditor may perform the following. No, first is conducting a preliminary risk assessment by utilizing a group interview. No, of course, through inquiries with management, et yung pwede nating gawing example, no. Of course, you want to have a kick-off meeting and you want to preliminary have a risk assessment, you do this through a group interview. It's possible na hindi mismong management yung involved. It's possible that only within that business unit yung involved mo. And you want also to uh, understand better the nature of the business unit's operation. So you need also, I mean, in order to do that, you need to cooperate with the senior management to allow you to have a group interview with that business unit. Okay. Also, you may perform to gather top management input on preliminary risk assessment. Of course, the first hand information, no, this is your understanding. Then you want to vouch your understanding through confirming it to the top management, no? And of course, they can provide some better insights or inputs with regard to how will your audit be planned or directed in terms of your increased better understanding of the risk assessment or the operations or business process of that business unit. Okay. Also, you may perform to prepare a draft annual plan based on the result of the risk assessment process. So after you understand the risk and the relevant controls, and of course through that the business operation or the nature of business operations, you can now draft the annual audit plan. Okay? And then after you drafted the annual audit plan together with your audit team, you can now obtain the formal approval of it coming from the audit committee or the board. Okay? So that is the annual audit plan. Okay. So of course with this plan, no, it will be subject to certain reviews, no, during the course of the audit, no. That is of course to ensure that the focus continues to be on higher risk area as um tawag dito as we have done it in the preliminary risk assessment. Okay? So of course, during the course of audit work, you have an improving understanding of that business unit, and you seem to notice na parang you need to update the risk that you have initially assessed during your planning. You can update it as well. Okay. So in addition, no, the need to conduct special assignment requested from audit committee and senior management may also require the deferral of planned audit work. Okay. If the management will defer the audit, that is another case. That's what we call limitation, no? Restriction, no? Management restriction, sorry. Now, if may kailangan i-defer, it's okay that may go signal with the audit committee and the senior management, no? As long as it is documented. Okay, yun ang importante sa atin as auditors. Everything should be documented, no? If that is the case, no, kung may deferral, no, seek the reason why, no, bakit there should be a deferral over that audit engagement, no, para we can include it in the what do you call this, in the work program. Okay. Additional work may require additional staff and the help of specialists or consultant coming from outside the company. So you can also seek the expertise of other um, people, like in the case of kunwari, example natin is when we do review of the what do you call this, the employee benefit, no, with regard to what do you call this, retirement, no, not a retirement benefit, no, you want to check the reasonableness of the amount stated there, no, you need to assess whether the current service cost is really reasonable with regard to your current manpower, your current revenue. So you can seek the help of expertise such as actuary, yung mga tipong gano'n. Okay? But however, no, kailangan pa rin ng approval ng audit committee, no, to obtain the service of that experts, no. Pwede rin kasing experts such as IT auditors or really IT experts, no. Kunwari kung very technical yung titignan nating area, no, lalo na kung titignan natin yung programming code ng isang system kasi possible na highly uh, operational na sila in an IT environment. So, baka kailangan talaga ng IT expert over that. Okay? Okay, next, the communication of the audit plan, no? Of course, after we seek, we get or obtain the approval of the audit committee or the board, we need to communicate the audit plan. So in here, how do we communicate the audit plans? Of course, we can do distribution of the annual audit plan to the senior management for their information. Next is that we need to keep also the senior management informed of any changes to annual audit plan. No, kumbaga, remember that we are administratively reporting to the senior management. Might as well inform them of any changes of the annual plan or annual audit plan. Then third, also, we should ensure that the management is informed about the internal audit work at least a month prior to starting the work. So that is a matter of showing courtesy to our what do you call this, to the senior management, or informing them that we are having an audit a month after. Parang pinapaalam mo na sa kanila to also allow them to talk to the concerned audit client, kunwari business unit na involved over that audit engagement, no, para for them also to be to prepare the necessary documents that you'll be looking into when you do the audit. Okay. Also, note that special requested assignment require different procedure involving little or no notification to involve management. So remember that we can also perform special requested assignment. No, in short, we can do some consultancy engagement. Not really audit. If it is an audit plan, then it's okay. Pero kung ito yung mga tipong special requested assignment, no, tipong yung consulting engagement natin pwedeng tawag dito, naka-embed, no, sa ating audit engagement. Make sure that this special assignment will have no uh, or little information to the involved person or business unit, no, lalo na kung may pinapacheck yung ating board or yung odd committee to a certain business unit or persons involved. As much as possible, we want to keep the information private sa atin. Okay? Kumbaga, it's between us, the internal auditors only, and the senior management, the audit committee or the board. Okay? If if there is any special assignment going parallel with the normal audit, tell the time frame for the completion of the additional assignment. So, also, kung sabi ko naka-embed yung special assignment or the consultancy engagement or the consulting engagement, just like with audit, that we set time frame for each task, we should also set a time frame for the completion of the special request assignment. Na dapat we communicate it to the requesting party. Most commonly, ang requesting party to, again, the board of directors or the audit committee. It's possible also the senior management. Basta hindi lang involve yung management na may kinalaman doon sa pinapatingin nung nagre-request na party sa pag-audit. Dapat wala silang information about that special request. Okay? Of course, if there is a need for additional person in the team because of additional work, raise the requisition at the most appropriate time. So, when we say at the most appropriate time, as much as possible, sa audit plan pa lang, alam na natin kung ano yung number of team members na kakailangan natin for that audit engagement. Pero, it's possible again that during the course of audit work na magbago yung scoping natin, no? Kung na-anticipate natin that we'll be needing additional manpower in the audit work, then we should request it or have a requisition of the additional manpower uh, by requesting it to the audit committee or the board. No? Kailangan at the appropriate time. Kailangan ahead of the um, time of task that it will be needing the additional manpower. No, wag yung parang uh, on the dot na kung kailan kailangan dun pa lang magsasabi. Kasi we don't want our audit committee or the board to to have any surprise with regard to that kind of request. Okay? Or short notice. Okay? So also we need to consider some fraud or fraud consideration. So managing the risk of fraud and corruption is the responsibility of the management. So you should remember that, no, it's not really the work of the um, internal auditor. So that is really the old mindset na bahala si internal auditor pagdating sa usaping fraud and corruption. Uh, Basically, just remember that the what you call this, the management is still has the responsibility over fraud and corruption. Okay? In here, audit procedures alone, even when performed with due professional care, cannot guarantee that fraud or corruption will be detected. Okay? So remember that internal auditors are not the experts for handling some uh, fraud investigations or fraud happenings, no. Remember that also internal auditors does not have the responsibility for the prevention or detection of the fraud and corruption. Kasi why? Again, it is the responsibility of the management, no. Internal auditors will, however, be alert in all their work to risk and exposures that would that could allow fraud or corruption. So meaning the auditors are present only to check if there are any indicators of fraud risk or corruption risk. They are not necessarily, again, the experts who will handle those risks. So, who will handle the fraud investigations in relation to that risk? It will be handled by an expert sa fraud. No? It's possible that they can hire a CFE or ang tawag doon, certified fraud examiner, no? Or possible there is a fraud department talaga sa isang organization, then they are the ones who should handle this kind of investigation, not really the internal auditors. Okay, so alam niyo ng mga BS internal auditing students, right? Okay. But however, no, internal audit may also be requested by management only to assist with fraud examination or investigation work. Again, not the performance of this examination or investigation work, only assistance. Okay. So for the planning activities, no, we have laid down here some of the items. So for the first one, evaluating operations or programs to ascertain whether results are consistent with established activities and goals, and whether the operations of programs or programs are being carried out as planned. Okay. Also included here, the planning activities is the monitoring and evaluating governance processes. So we need to check the processes currently being followed by those who are charged in the governance oversight. So also known as the board of directors. Okay. Also included in the planning activities is the monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of the organization risk management process. So coming from the definition of internal auditing, we should also evaluate the effectiveness of the risk management. Okay? Of course, kung tinitingnan natin yung governance and then yung risk management, remember, we are also looking into the control processes. Okay? Next, also included in the planning activities is the evaluating the quality of performance of external auditors and the degree of coordination required with internal audit. Of course, we don't want to have what we call uh, tawag dito, double work or yung ano, yung inefficiency in terms of doing audit work. Kung meron naman ng ginawa yung external auditor, then we can check with the external auditor if they have performed that kind of work, no, or audit work. And if ever, we shall also evaluate the degree of coordination, no, required with us. Kasi baka mamaya hindi pa tapos yung audit work ng external auditor and we can rely over that, then we should coordinate with them as internal auditors yung ginagawa nila. Baka we can also do some of those tasks sa atin, sa counterpart natin para we can work as a team or we can do that audit work in collaboration. Okay? Also included here, the performance of consulting and advisory services related to governance, risk management, and control as appropriate for the company. So yung kanina, that is in relation to the common work of of audit, no? Ngayon, we can also provide or perform consultancy and advisory services in relation also to the three areas, no? Na pwedeng naka-embed sa ating audit plan. Okay? Also included here, reporting periodically on the internal audit activities purpose, authority, responsibility, and performance relative to its plan. Okay? So at least we should also give an update to our audit committee as to the um, progress of our audit with regard to our plan. And we also have to check the internal audit charter if the purpose, authority, and responsibility are still validly existing, no? Kasi possibly baka may nagbago sa ating organizational structure, then and then in terms of the scope of our audit work, we need to update also the purpose, authority, and responsibility. Remember that we can also include in the internal audit charter the audit plan, okay, or the common engagements that are performed in the internal audit activity. Okay. Also included in the planning activity is the reporting of significant risk exposures and control issues, including fraud risk, governance issues, and other matters needed or requested by the board. So again, since we've mentioned about requesting some special assignment, we need to report it, no, of any progress. And of course, in the performance of audit work, if there are any exposures or control issues that are significant, we should also report those one. Kasi baka may need na immediate response or action ng management and the board, no, yung pag-address ng issue na yon. Kasi baka mamaya we are losing a lot of money. So we should also be considering there the time or the times of essence with regard to that matter. Okay. Also included in the planning activities, the evaluation of a specific operation at the request of the board or management as appropriate. So if we also have this kind again of a special request assignment in terms of evaluating the specific operations, we should also do as told so, no, at the request of the board or the management. Okay? So, yun yung mga kailangan natin consider sa mga planning activities to mga items na to. Okay? Now we go to the planning for external and operations audit. So, in here, parang may kita natin, ano yung difference ba ng dalawa when we do um, tawag the planning for the external, so yung FS auditors, and the operations auditors sa internal auditors naman. Okay? So, parang actually may common ano naman sila, common base naman sila in terms of doing audit work. Of course, their focus is different lang. Okay? So, the major difference, no, between planning an operational audit and a financial audit is the diversity created by the breadth of the operational audit. So, meaning the scope of the operational audit. Kasi ang operational audit, again, we are looking every aspect of the operation. And again, hindi naka-confine si operation audit kay accounting and auditing. We are also looking into different disciplines within the organization. That is why, which often makes it difficult to decide on specific objectives since very diverse yung ating pwedeng subject matter na i-audit. Okay? So auditors select objectives based on the criteria developed, no? We've cited criterias, no, as early, I mean kanina lang, 'di ba? For the engagement, no, depending on the specific circumstances at hand, no. For example, the objectives for an operational audit on the effectiveness, no, of the internal control over payroll will be dramatically different from those of an operational audit of the efficiency of the research and development department, which is very true. Kasi 'di ba, with payroll, we are looking after the payroll. Now with tawag dito, with research and development department, we are specifically checking the cost. No, kasi titingnan natin kung yung mga program na nandoon sa research and development department ay pasok pa rin yung cost nila sa budget. Okay, so tinitingnan din natin yung operational aspect ng HR with regard to the payroll or the payroll, sorry, and with regard to the research and development department. Magkaiba sila kasi talaga ng nature of their operations din naman, no? Kung ano yung function talaga nila rather, no? Yet, no, these diverse objectives may be part of a single operational audit, no? It's possible also that we are doing um an operational audit wherein we scope, yeah, included in its scope are two different departments. Pero ang kanyang objective ay isa lang naman. No? Let's say for example, kanina, example ko, yung research and development department, we are looking or we are reviewing also the efficiency, no, or the cost. So it's possible that we are also looking the cost or reviewing the efficiency of the payroll. So isang ano lang naman siya objective. Pero kumbaga sa process magkaiba sila. How they come up with incurring such cost. Okay? So in here, the breadth of the operational audit often makes staffing, no? Staffing more complicated than in a financial audit. That is very true, no? Not only are the areas diverse, such as production control and advertising, but the objectives, no, within those areas are require special technical skills, no? For example, no, the auditor may need an engineering background, no, to evaluate performance on major construction projects. So that is very true, no? Unlike with FS audit, kahit you are a CPA, no, you can do audit for all kinds of engagement. Kasi remember that we are looking the FS and its disclosure in relation, in compliance or in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework, right? Kasi remember the standards are set, no, kumbaga regardless of the industry that you are in, no, pare-parehas dapat kayo ng standard, no? Unless specific may require disclosure coming from regulators or regulatory body. Okay? So, ang point lang natin dito, whereas with operations audit, no, sabi ko nga kanina, baka may review ka or audit that would require some technical skills like IT, no? Let's say, for example, you are reviewing also um, the logical process of a certain program. So that would require really you an expert, no, unless you are the expert already, you know the programming codes already or you're familiar with that. So yun, um and then it's good, no. Ang biglang natin sabihin dito, very diverse ng operations audit, it might require several expertise in the areas of economics, no, information technology, possible pa nga psychologist, no, baka may behavioral aspect pang i-consider dapat yung operations auditor, yung mga tipong ganon. Okay? Also, no, finally, unlike financial audit, operational audits require auditors to spend more time with the interested parties agreeing on the terms of the engagement and the criteria for evaluation. So katulad nga ng sabi ko kanina with FS audit, ang isa lang naman yung tinitingnan naman nating ano diyan criteria, no. Of course that is what we are checking if the required disclosures are again in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework, no. With operations auditing, yun lang, lalo na kung wala talaga tayong criteria. 'Di ba kanina may na-mention tayong criteria like historical performance, engineered standards, and benchmarking. Kung wala tayong mga criteria, then again, ano yung final natin? It's the agreement with the management. Okay? So, sa pag-set pa lang ng criteria dun sa agreement, no, it will take more time. Baka kasi mamaya, iba yung perspective ng audit client, iba yung perspective ng management, iba yung perspective ng internal auditors. They need to communicate to each other kung ano dapat yung magiging final criteria that will be used in doing the operations audit. Okay? So regardless of the source of the criteria for evaluation, it is essential that the representatives of the entity to be audited. Okay? the operational auditor, and the entity or the persons to whom the findings will be reported are clear and in agreement on the objectives and criteria involved. So, yun yung na-mention ko kanina. Kailangan they have an agreement or consensus kung ano yung gagamitin nilang criteria and ano yung objective of the engagement. Naintindihan? Okay? So after discussing the planning phase of the operations audit, we go to the second phase of the operations audit, what we call evidence accumulation and evaluation. It is also known as our field work. No, I think with your assurance principle, your professor have already discussed about field work. So field work yung pinaka-importante kasi in here you are obtaining the evidences. So in here, in this discussion, the next succeeding slides, no, or the next slides, we'll be focusing matters or factors that has a relevance to evidence. Okay? In here, no, the type of evidence introduced during your financial statement audits are equally applicable also to operational auditing. So mamaya medyo familiar naman kayo no with assurance principle. Wala namang pinagbago rin pagdating kay operations auditing. No? Siguro ano lang, more of less lang kayo siguro sa ah, tawag dito, sa makikitang numbers. Kasi remember, we are looking after the process or the operations. So most likely marami kayong makikitang paper na hindi documents related to accounting. Okay? Because internal controls and operating procedures are a critical part of operational auditing, it is common to use documentation, client inquiry, analytical procedures, and observation extensively. Okay, so when you say documentation, you document your audit procedure performed and the result. Also included here the client inquiry. When you say client inquiry, you inquire some of the questions that you raised during your during your interview. So you need also to document that one. Analytical procedure, you are looking for a relationship between two variables within, it's possible it is a financial or non-financial information. Diba? So you're familiar with the analytical procedure as discussed in your assurance principle and financial management. And of course, included here is the observation, no? Ang observation dito, ang example natin with FS audit is the inventory count, right? Now, with the operations audit, you can also perform inventory count, no? You use your observation in checking the existence of the inventory, okay? Also here, confirmation, performance, and recalculation are used less extensively for most operational audit. Why? Yung confirmation, performance, and recalculation, mas applicable siya with FS audit. With confirmation, remember, we are confirming the balances of certain accounts to an outside party. Let's say, for example, the cash in bank, we are confirming the account balance from or from the banks, right? And then with your accounts receivable, we are confirming the balances uh, to your customer. With accounts payable to your supplier. Okay? With performance hindi na kasi most of the time you are doing test of control. So, since possible that initially you are doing performance or you ask for a performance of a certain process, the next audit, no, you will require less performance if in case the process and procedure have or hindi nagbago or not or ano ba tawag doon, have not changed. Okay. For recalculation, you do some recalculation if you want to test the reasonableness of the accounts, no, or the account balances, or the reasonableness of some real and nominal accounts. Okay. Dito, ang recalculation, most likely, ang gumagawa niyan is the FS auditor or the external auditor. Now, in doing financial review, di ba, in the financial review, most likely you are reviewing the budget versus the actual expense. So, most likely, pwede mong gawin yung recalculation doon. Pero less na as compared to FS audit. Okay? Because in here, the existence and accuracy objectives are not relevant anymore, or are basically not relevant for most operational audit. Pero for some, pwede pang relevant, pero not all, as compared again with your FS audit. Okay. In here, no, the second phase of assurance engagement, ito yun, no, yung evidence, no, or fieldwork involves performing the tests that were outlined in the planning phase and evaluating the results. So, remember, in evidence gathering or fieldwork, no, tayo ay guided ng ating ginawang planning. Okay? Specifically, the internal auditors conducts the following steps, no? Number one, they conduct tests to gather evidence, no? This involves completing each of the tests identified during the planning stage. Also, during this step, the internal auditor gathers and documents sufficient appropriate evidence to support the conclusion regarding how effectively the controls are operating. So, sufficient meaning the quantity, and appropriate the number. Okay. Also, included here, evaluate the evidence gathered and reach some certain conclusion. So, in each procedure that you perform and you gather an evidence, based from the evidence that you gather, uh, you need to reach to a conclusion in in relation sa objective na naset mo doon sa ginawa mong audit procedure. Okay? This step requires the internal auditor to consider the initial evaluation of the control design as well as the result of testing and form a conclusion as to whether the underlying risks are being mitigated to an acceptable level. Kasi if you have gathered the evidence, no, it's possible that you can conclude that the presence of that evidence would really mitigate the underlying risk to an acceptable level. Okay? Or what we call the risk tolerable level. Also, no, the last step, no, to develop observations and formulate recommendations. So after you gather the evidence, after you provide the conclusion, you now develop some observation and recommendations if applicable. Kung there are certain areas that are needing further improvement, if wala naman, pwedeng observation na lang, no? Not necessarily yung ating ginawang audit ay may recommendations. Possible na maganda naman na yung ano natin yung process natin. There are no more recommendations that you can think of, no, and then what you can do is to provide an observation na lang, no, to check na the the design of the controls are operating as intended, yung mga tipong ganon. Okay? In here, no, finally, any control deficiencies identified, no, during the engagement should be documented to facilitate discussion with the appropriate management and ultimately communication to the appropriate stakeholders. So, lalo na kung meron namang deficiency, it should be documented well. And what is the basis of saying it? That deficient yung control. So, what instances would you cite? It's possible na maganda, no? Hindi possible. It is better if you can provide evidence with regard to what you have concluded na may deficiency over that control. At least when you do presentation of the audit results to the management, it can be backed up with your evidence that you have hit or documented in your working papers. Okay? So we talk about now the audit evidence, and we all know that audit evidence is really important in the performance also of the audit work, kasi it would really support the conclusions that you reach and the opinion, if ever applicable, with regard to a certain audit or review. Kasi without the audit evidence, how can you say that you can let's say for example for FS audit, that you can say that the FS is presented fairly in all material respects, no? So dapat meron kang audit evidence over that, and that is through the audit working papers. Okay? Kasi kung wala kang audit working papers, then of course kung wala kang evidence na in-embed doon, definitely uh, you are uh, having that kind of high audit risk, no? Kasi may missing kang tawag dito, step, that is documentation and keeping of the evidence. Okay? So in here, internal auditing is is based on logic, no, which involves reasoning and drawing inferences. So most likely, uh, based from the evidences, doon pala mag-infer na tayo eh. So it involves a lot of reasoning. So dapat magaling tayo mag-reason out dito. Okay? Internal auditors rely extensively on seasoned professional judgment when they formulate conclusions and advice based on evidence they gather and evaluate. Okay, so lagi tayong babalik at babalik sa word ng professional judgment. Lalo na kung we have assessed na medyo ano tayo eh, torn between saying na operating effectively and not operating effectively yung isang control based on the evidences that we've gathered. So that professional judgment will definitely help you really in reaching out certain conclusions, no? Dapat yung professional judgment mo, again, it is backed up with appropriate and sufficient evidence. Okay? Such interactions and communications are critical to conducting the engagement effectively and efficiently. It is important, therefore, for internal auditors to be open, communicative, and collaborative. So, ito yun, no? Remember, as much as possible, we are skeptical. Pero, we want to have a right balance between being skeptical and being, what you call this, helpful to the organization in terms of achieving their objectives. So, to balance both, no, we need also to be open to our audit client for any possible, kunwari, we have an audit finding and then they said that it is not really a finding, wag naman masyadong sarado yung utak, no? We can check their side, no? And their evidence that they've provided to us. You use your professional judgment. If the evidence would change your finding. Kasi baka mamaya totoo naman talagang maayos yung controls nila, nagkataon na may outlier or may isolated case lang naman, then you can cite those one, no? And aside from being open, we should be communicative also. Communicative in a way na when we assess that the evidence is not enough to close that finding, then we should be well, I mean, we should communicate that those assess I mean those um what do you call this, those assessment by us, no, and we should have a and we should be also working collaboratively with our tawag dito, with our audit client, no, kasi ang tawag dito, remember that as internal auditors we should have interpersonal skills. Remember na if we have interpersonal skills, no, possible na mapi-back tayo ng ating mga audit client in terms of providing documents for audit or review, yung mga tipong gano'n. And maganda kung maganda yung harmonious relationship with them through collaborating them with some of the works that they need or that they nari, kailangan nila ng ano ng guidance natin with regard to some of the work that they are currently performing. Baka may ginagawa silang improvement in the process, then sinik nila yung help natin, then we have to be open with that, no? To collaborate with them para ma-improve pa yung process. Yun yung ibig nating sabihin dito, no? The internal auditor must always be mindful, however, that the managers and employees from whom evidence is gathered may not adequately understand the purpose, objectives, and scope of the engagement or the manner in which the engagement is conducted. That is why, no, sa planning pa lang dapat involved din sila in a way na inform sila of our engagement objectives, the scope of our work, and the expected report to be issued to them. Mga tipong ganun. Okay? Moreover, some managers or employees may see the engagement as a threat to them. In other words, think that the internal auditors are specifically looking for things that they have done wrong. So I've been very vocal about this one, no. That internal auditors should not be seen as ano ba? Uh shift blamers or pinpointers of issues kasi That's the old tawag dito, image that we want our stakeholders na mawala, no? Kasi we want our stakeholders to see us really the pioneer for change, 'di ba? We are the catalyst for change. So, yun yung gusto nating iparating sa kanila, no? Na hindi tayo after sa pag-pinpoint ng tao. We are more of uh, looking onto the process and improving it, not really on the people. Kasi yun yung tingin ng iba eh, ay nandiyan na yung auditor. No? Hindi dapat ganun yung thinking nila. Sabihin nila dapat i-change natin yung mindset nila. Ay nandiyan na yung auditor, kakausapin ko to kasi ayusin niya yung proseso ko. Sana ganun yung ano natin ma-keep na mindset sa kanila. So actually align naman to sa sa IPPF, no, na dapat we are process centered sa paggawa ng audit or ng review. Okay, kung may mga instances na meron tayong deviation, we do not want the blame to be pinpointed to that person, but rather on the process. Okay? Unfortunately, no, the threat of management and or employees errors and fraud always exists. So hindi nawawala yung errors. Meron talaga yan. Remember that errors are unintentional one, no? And fraud is really intentional one. Okay? So yung threat of management madalas present naman yan eh. Pero kung if you have that kind of high ethical culture, then threat of management is keep at the minimum. Okay, so kaya nga importante natin diniscuss yung governance kasi when you have a good governance, most likely you have a high good ethical culture na may minimum pagdating sa may little threat pagdating sa management. Okay. And of course, malelesen or ma-mitigate din yung errors and fraud. Pero meron pa rin at meron pa rin yan. Hindi totally or absolutely mawawala. Now we talk about the professional skepticism and reasonable assurance. No, although internal auditors are engaged to use a conversational and participative approach when conducting the reviews, sorry, they must also remember that they are tasked with verifying the integrity of the information gathered and make sure that their conclusions are sound. So, yun yung sinasabi natin, no? Lalo na if we are gathering the evidence, hindi agad tayo maniniwala na yung evidence would enough or sufficient and appropriate enough to say that the controls are operating effectively, no? And to make our conclusion sound, no, we should apply what we call the concept of professional skepticism. Hindi agad tayo maniniwala. Ito yung number one rule sa mga auditors. Hindi agad tayo paniwala agad sa mga sabi-sabi or binibigay sa atin. Yung tipong dapat matanong tayo. Okay? So in here, when obtaining and using evidence, internal auditors should display healthy professional skepticism and verify the quality of the information gathered and used. So as mentioned earlier, when the audit client present their information or support, no, just stay as much as possible courteous in accepting the evidence and say that you'll just be needing verification of the information or support provided to you before any issue can be closed out, no. Of course through that you will be having an ample time, no, of saying na talaga by saying that na you can actually review more the information provided to you. Okay, internal auditors should be sufficiently suspicious of data received and reasonably verify that the information is free from manipulation or modification in ways that can compromise its quality. Actually, you can tell if the evidence or the documents presented to you have been manipulated or modification, no, through verification. No, you verify first if the documents are really genuine or free from any manipulation. Okay. When there are doubts, no, the auditor must determine if those conditions make the evidentiary matter too unreliable for use. Okay. Actually, through that point, no, or in that point, you will determine if that evidence would be too unreliable for us to use. Okay. Similarly, internal auditors should approach interview and meetings with sufficient skepticism, no, in case of only oral representation, no, always attempting to verify the information that was provided to you, no, corroborate also the testimony received and observing behavioral changes that could indicate deceit. So, from the representation or oral representation provided to you, you can corroborate those through physical evidence like documents or written what do you call this written verbatim of what has been told to you or discussed to you, and also you can note if there are any uh, behavioral changes, no, usually this is one of the possible indicators that there is a defraud of the representation made to you by the management, no? Parang how can I tell this one or discuss this one? For example, from a very moody business unit, they become too friendly to you now. So definitely, no, you look in also to that matter or consider that factor na there are changes in the behavior. Nung bigla parang bumait sa'yo kasi they are now under audit. No? In-year corroboration may involve obtaining supporting documentation. Initially, no, to substantiate claims or oral representations made by or finding others to verify the accuracy of the statement that you receive. Another important source of information to ensure that the auditor is working with reliable data is to obtain the assistance of a subject matter expert. It's possible that you can check that or have it check the documents provided to you by another verifier to tell you that the documents are definitely genuine. So how would you do that? Through the employment or seeking the help of the SME or the subject matter expert. These individuals can provide a wealth of knowledge and assistance in way that the others may need years of diligent work and study to achieve. Now, let's say, for example, again, in terms of programming code, checking the logical um, aspect of the program or the code, now you can seek the assistance of an IT expert or a programming expert, no, in checking if the program codes are really effectively helping the company in achieving its objectives. Okay. So SMEs can be internal or external to the organization. No. Well, with internal, it can be that engineering expertise is required. You can seek the help of an engineering person within the engineering department to help you um, review and analyze further the the subject matter or the matter under review or audit. Okay. Previous audit experience is not required, but the SME must be willing to work with the auditor with a collaborative disposition and with the goal of seeking to find the true conditions within the scope review areas. As much as possible, no, kindly communicate any want that anything that you want to of course with the expert you want to seek a opinion, no, and if you want to seek a clear-cut opinion, state the objectives of your audit. And if this has been communicated to the expert, definitely he or she will has this context on what um, conditions he or she will be looking after, no? Kasi you've already communicated kung ano yung gusto mong ma-attain sa iyong ginagawang audit. Okay? Moreover, internal auditors' conclusion and advice must be formed at a reasonable cost within a reasonable length of time to add economic value. Okay? Accordingly, internal auditors strive to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to provide a reasonable basis for formulating conclusion and advice. This concept is referred to us by the internal auditors as reasonable assurance. Okay? As much as possible, we want to have an evidence or sufficient and appropriate evidence as a basis of providing a reasonable basis for giving conclusion. So that's what we call again, reasonable assurance. We don't want our um, audit work to provide an absolute assurance because that is not possible. No? Kasi we can provide 100% audit. That is why auditors, by its very nature, are all reasonable assurance. Okay? And now we go to the persuasiveness of the audit evidence. Audit evidence is persuasive if it enables the internal auditors to formulate well-founded conclusions and advise confidently. Okay? This to be persuasive, no, the evidence should be relevant, reliable, and sufficient. When I say relevant, no, is the evidence pertinent to the audit objective? Does it logically support the internal auditor's conclusion or advice? If your answers to these questions are yes, then definitely your audit evidence is relevant. Okay. Another persuasive included in the persuasiveness of audit evidence is reliable. If it answers the questions, did the evidence come from a credible source? Did the internal auditor directly obtain the evidence? If these are answered as yes, then definitely your audit evidence is reliable. And lastly, it can be said sufficient if it also answers the following questions. Has the internal auditor obtained enough evidence? Do different but related pieces of evidence corroborate each other? If again your answers to these questions are yes, then definitely the audit evidence is sufficient. Now, for us to say that the audit evidence is persuasive, it must be what? Reliable, relevant, and sufficient. So this should be present. Okay. Of course, there are useful guidelines internal auditors can follow if they remember that guidelines are generally characterized by exceptions. So such guidelines include number one, evidence obtained from independent third parties is more reliable than evidence obtained from auditing personnel. That is very true. Of course, the more that the evidence is obtained from person other than the person we are auditing, it is more reliable. Now, another guideline is that evidence produced by a process or system with effective controls, remember, with effective controls, is more reliable than the evidence produced by a process or system with ineffective controls. Okay, so remember the difference between the two. The evidence that is produced by a process or system with effective control is more reliable than with those with uh, ineffective controls. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, if there are ITGC or information technology general controls and application controls, then possibly it has an effective control yung system. Then more reliable yung evidence na mapoproduce nun rather than doon sa system na walang access controls, no, walang information technology general controls, walang application controls, then definitely yung mapoproduce na report or evidence is not reliable. Okay? Also, evidence obtained directly by the internal auditor is more reliable than the evidence obtained indirectly. So meaning, initially, ang unang nakatanggap ng document or ng evidence is the internal auditor. That makes that evidence more reliable than those that the internal auditor obtained from others. Okay? Lalo na kung within a company nang galing yung documenting. Kasi it is subject to manipulation or modification, right? Okay, next. Documented evidence is more reliable than undocumented evidence. So meaning, documented evidence, those that are in documents, rather than undocumented evidence such as testimony no? Yung ano, yung oral representation, no? Hindi reliable 'yun. Next, timely evidence is more reliable than untimely evidence. Let's say, for example, the scope of our audit is for the year 2021. And then, ang nakuha nating evidence is in document dated 2020. Hindi na reliable yan sa ating audit work. Ang more reliable is yung pasok doon sa ating scope of time sa ating audit work, which is 2021 dapat. Okay? So, second to the last, corroborated evidence is more sufficient than uncorroborated or contradictory evidence. So, when you say corroborated evidence, a set of evidence can also be, its persuasiveness can be more if there are any other evidence available that would say that it is a reliable evidence also, or it is backed by another evidence, no? Let's say, for example, sabi nga natin, there is a testimony. If there is the corroborating evidence for that also is a statement, no, the verbatim statement of the testimony, and the recorded video if ever the testimony is being recorded. So that is a more sufficient evidence. Now, larger samples produce more sufficient evidence than smaller samples. So that is also very true. Kasi the smaller the samples that you've tested, no, hindi siya sufficient enough. The more, it makes sense naman, di ba? The more sample that you gather, so tinignan mo sa 100 na evidence na ko mo or documents out of 120, may nakita kang tatlong finding, then that is more reliable than looking into only 10 documents out of 120 and wala kang nakitang error or finding, no? Hindi siya sufficient. So, you see, when the larger your sample is, it is more sufficient. Okay? So, in here we have also um, be discussing the types of audit evidence. So, we have four. We have here testimonial, then physical, documentary, and analytical. When we say testimonial evidence consists of verbal or written statements or assertions given by someone as proof regarding the matter being discussed. Okay? In the case of internal audit, anyone being audited may be asked to give testimonial evidence during interviews about a variety of topics. Example include the steps performed while performing a loan process application, how the employee pays incoming invoices, the procedures to record the purchases of inventory in accounting system, or the steps followed when notified that an employee has been hired and access needs to be granted to the computer systems. There are two types, no? First is the testimony, is what the individual states about his or her own personal knowledge about something, while hearsay is testimony based on what was heard about the topic. In other words, heard said by someone else. Yung una, first-hand information, ikalawa, second-hand information, no? Yung hearsay. Auditors should be careful to corroborate verbal statements, especially hearsay, because the individual could have misunderstood the facts or interpreted the information incorrectly. So it's more, it's better that we gather the information at first hand rather than having it gathered second hand or yung hearsay lang, no? Now, second type of audit evidence is what we call physical. It can be either through observation or inspection. Observation, in general, auditors visually evaluate the physical facilities, conditions, and practices to verify that they exist, their condition, valuation, and protection. The observation can be done in two ways. So, one way is that the auditee knows that the auditor is observing. Number two, the auditee does not know that the auditor is observing. So, yung isa, without the knowledge of the auditee that the auditor would be observing, isa may knowledge, no? The quality of the information obtained could depend on whether the auditee knows or does not know that the auditor is taking note. When the auditee knows about the auditor's observation, there is a possibility that the individual involved will modify their behavior. So yun yung parang yung kapag wala ng surprise of element, yung parang you've noted or you've informed your audit client that you'll be doing audit, uh, there's a possibility yung kanilang behavior will be changed or modified. So it is viewed favorably by the auditor. In a work site, there's a possibility that the laborers do not wear their safety equipment consistently, even if they are supposed to and they know they should. But when the auditor is present, they will wear the gear and follow workplace procedures to avoid being discovered and reported. This behavior modification can result in false negatives where the typical behavior is not displayed during observation. Okay? So, yun yung disadvantage lang kapag alam nila. Now, kung hindi nila alam, at least sa observation pa lang, makikita pa lang kung sino yung mga sumusunod at pasawa in terms of the procedures present. Okay? For the document inspection, no, pertaining to the physical evidence, no, another common way of collecting evidence is by reviewing the documents, no. In fact, this is one of the most common procedure performed by auditors who examine documents to verify the date and amount of transactions, agreements made between various parties, the evidence of authorizations, and record of decisions made, among others. Okay? Documents can be internal or external. It can also be financial or non-financial. And auditor may be searching for specific items on the document. So, yung specific lang sa document. So, in the case of accounts payable payments, no, the auditor may want to look at the amount of each payment to compare it to the invoice received, the address where the payment should have been sent, and the name of the person who approved the payment to make sure that the approver or the authorizer do so, no? Although internal auditors are not expected to be experts on altered or forged documents, they should pay close attention to each document in search of anomalous elements constituting red flag. So, actually, minsan nga, kahit nga sa documents, minsan obvious na nga may pinapalitan, uh, the auditors can tell if these documents uh, have been altered or forged. Okay. So for the next audit evidence is what we call documentary. Okay. When you say documentary, this consists of created information. Reliability is affected by the source. For example, accounting records, invoices, letters, and contracts. Okay, in here, if an invoice lacks a professional appearance, does not have what appears to be a corporate logo, phone number, street number, website, contact information, the print is slanted or has the mathematical errors such as the tax rate or amount, the auditor should examine the document further. No? The prevalence of high quality printers make the creation of professionally looking documents easier than ever before as compared 10 years ago. Totoo naman yun. Kasi ngayon, pwede nang ma-alter yung documents, kunwari, making it really genuine. No? Kasi ngayon may mga sophisticated app na pwedeng gayahin yung official receipt or sales invoice ng isang company and then kukopihin lang, then i-alter lang yung amount to make it really genuine. Okay? And possible segregation of duties or conflicts of interest within an organization can make the submission of fraudulent invoices a problem many organizations discover the hard way. Okay? Then the last one, the analytical, this is analysis or verification of information. Analytical procedures entail assessing information obtained during an engagement by comparing the information with expectations identified or developed by the internal auditor. It is important for internal auditors to develop expectations independently based on knowledge of the auditee, the organization industry, and the economy before accumulating and analyzing information to ensure that the ensuing comparisons are unbiased. Okay? Another is recalculation or performance. Mathematical recalculation is a form of audit evidence and in it consists of checking the accuracy of documents or records. Sometimes auditors are performing the work of others to verify the accuracy and the completeness of the work done and to confirm that the amount is correct. Okay, so through this four audit evidence, no, uh, you can actually um, corroborate evidence, no, from any of this one, no. Again, the difference between the physical and documentary is that the difference is with physical, no, you observe the physical document, no. With the documentary evidence, you are not really observing the document, but rather you obtain a document and you have it as a support, as an evidence to the representation of the client. Let's say, for example, for a physical count of inventory, you want to make sure that uh, the physical count is really being performed. So you observe that the inventory personnel are really counting the items, and then you see that they have these tally sheets. So through the tally sheets that you've observed, that is a physical uh, observation of document. Now, for the documentary evidence, the example would be the common documents that we know in accounting. Let's say, for example, the sales invoice, the delivery receipts, the bill of lading, the the what do you call this, the purchase order. So that is documents are example of what we call documentary evidence. So you see the difference between the two. Okay. Now we go to the audit procedures. Okay. So in here, audit procedures are specific tasks performed by the internal auditor to gather the evidence required to achieve the prescribed audit objective. Okay, so basically these are parang you lay down the task that needs to be performed by the internal auditor in order to achieve the audit objective. They are applied during the audit process to first obtain a thorough understanding of the auditee, including audit's objectives, risk, and controls. So it's more of really understanding the auditee itself and some of the related objective, risk, and controls present over that audit client. Next is to test the design and adequacy and operating effectiveness of the targeted area system of internal controls. Of course, it is also used to analyze the plausible relationship among different elements of data, just like with analytical procedures, right? Okay, then next we have to test directly recorded financial and non-financial information for errors and fraud. Okay, and lastly, that is to obtain a sufficient appropriate evidence to achieve the prescribed audit objective involved in determining the nature, extent, and timing of audit procedures to perform. Okay. Okay, so these are the uses of the audit procedures during the audit process, no? So these are the purposes of it. Okay. So next we have here the nature, extent, and timing of audit procedures. Okay. When we say nature of audit procedures, it relates to the types of tests that the internal auditor performs to achieve his or her objective. Okay. So in here, one-to-one relationship between the audit objectives and audit procedures are rare. Okay? Individual audit procedures often provide evidence that is pertinent to more than one objective. And more than one audit procedure often is required to meet a particular audit objective. Different types of tests provides varying levels of assurance, okay, take different amounts of time to conduct, and are more or less expensive. The internal auditor must weigh the relative benefits and costs of conducting different types of procedures. Depending on the nature of the engagement, an internal auditor may use a manual audit procedure, computer assisted audit techniques, or a combination of the two to gather sufficient appropriate evidence. Okay? Also, the auditor here obtains audit evidence by one or more of the following procedures. So we have here different audit procedures. So I think ito na-mention na rin naman sa assurance principle. So for number one, inspection of records or documents. Okay, so ito yung pagtingin natin ng mga documentary evidences. Okay. Number two, inspection of tangible asset. This is specifically true if you want to check the existence of the tangible asset. Okay. Number three, observation. Again, the observation would include uh, observation of inventory count, observation of cash count. Okay, so that's observation. Number four, inquiry inquiry as with regard to any finding that you noted with deviations between the procedure and actual tawag ito actual actual record, no? If there is any deviation, an audit procedure for that would be inquiry, no? To further understand what is causing the deviation between the two. Then five, another procedure would be confirmation. Now, confirmation of account balances to other third party involved, no? Let's say, for example, again, cash confirmation, accounts receivable confirmation, accounts payable confirmation, and it can also be possible confirmation of assets held in trust in the custody of another company. Okay. Also, we have here an audit procedure pertaining to recalculation. Recalculation meaning you are testing the reasonableness of the amount disclosed in reports. No, so you do your independent recalculation. Okay, if it will tally with the amount recorded in the books of the audit client. Now, for another audit procedure, what they call reperformance, reperformance of the process to check its alignment with what has been laid down in the documented procedure of the audit client. Okay, analytical procedure. You can perform analytical procedure during the audit fieldwork. It can also be during planning and closing, no? When it's an analytical procedure, we are checking if there are any relationship between the financial and non-financial information uh, of relating to the audit client, no? Example of this is performing analytical procedure of the financial statement to check whether um the turnover would really say, no, or the computer turnover would really say what is currently being practiced in the organization or through their policy and procedures. Okay, another would be vouching. Your vouching would be coming from checking the final document going back to the original document. Now, if you're checking the uh, original document going to the final document, is what they call tracing. Okay, so that is also an audit procedure. So I've mentioned here 10 audit procedures and some of the explanation. I think you are also familiar with this one, no? As I've mentioned earlier. Okay, here's an illustration of evidence in operations audit. So let me read through this. No, consider the example of the agency evaluating the safety of elevators in a city. Assume the parties agreed that the objective is to determine whether a competent inspector makes an annual inspection of each elevator in the city. To satisfy the completeness objective, the auditors might examine blueprints of city buildings and elevators, locations, and trace them to the agency list to ensure that all elevators are included in the population. Additional tests on newly constructed buildings will be appropriate to assess the timeliness with which the central listing is updated. Assuming auditors determine that the agency's list is complete, they can select a sample of elevators location and collect evidence as to the timing and frequency of inspections. The auditor may want to consider inherent risk by doing greater sampling of older elevators or elevators with previous safety defects. The auditor may also want to examine evidence of the elevator's inspector's competence by reviewing resumes, training programs, competency examinations, and performance reports. It is also likely that the auditor will want to reperform the inspection procedure for a sample to obtain evidence of inconsistencies in the reported and actual conditions. Just like financial auditors, operational auditors must accumulate sufficient appropriate evidence to provide a basis for a conclusion about the objectives being tested. For an audit of elevator safety, the auditor must accumulate sufficient evidence about uh, elevator safety inspections. After the evidence is accumulated, the auditor must decide whether it is reasonable to conclude that an inspection is made annually of each elevator in the city by a competent inspector. So as you see in this scenario or illustration, the auditors were able to come up with some strategy in order for them to gather the evidences. So they make use of the list. So from the list, they consider the all the buildings. So they also check the uh, inspection made by the inspectors and also with the new ones. Okay. And through that performance, in here, the operational auditors must be able now to accumulate sufficient and appropriate evidence as a basis for them to, provide conclusion about the audit objective that they are performing. Okay. Or rather, provide a base for conclusion about the objectives being tested. Okay, now we go to the audit working papers. So your audit working papers are documents created by auditors to record the work done. They are a collection of evidentiary materials showing the planning done, the fieldwork activities performed, and the support for all information mentioned in the audit report or other communication of results. They are also very useful during training and professional development, and as mentioned previously, also helpful while planning future engagements. Since auditors provide assurance regarding the conditions present during the review, the work papers form the evidence that the audit was done according to the standard. So remember that your audit working papers are also evidence of the audit report that you issued. So any finding that you mentioned in the audit report should be present in the audit working papers. Okay. So another purpose, as mentioned, no, your audit working papers can be used for future I mean, training of your audit staff and professional development, no, for them to know the best practices in creating the audit working paper. So basically, the audit working papers are the what do you call this? Documentation of the audit procedures that you perform, the results of the audit procedures, and your reach conclusion. And some may include attachment, no, of evidence with regard to the conclusion that they reach. Okay, so yun yung audit working papers. So I think sinasabi natin na we document everything that we did and the process that we noted of during the course of our audit. Okay? So dun para ang itsura niya usually, no, yung audit working papers para siyang naka-Excel, and then may procedure, and then after that procedure, i-note mo dun yung audit procedures, the results of your the performed audit procedures, and then the conclusion and attachment. No, parang ano siya, in a way it is organized na if it is read by the supervisor, it can be easily reviewed and checked, no, and given comments if any. Okay. So what are the purposes and content of the working paper? So because of the many purposes working papers serve, as mentioned earlier, it is difficult to overstate their importance. No, sorry for that. For example, working papers, ito no, binulat natin no. First, aid in the planning and performing the engagement. No, the working papers includes audit procedure. So that in fact aid in the performance of the engagement. And of course, if you're doing the work program, you initially put there the audit procedure. So it aids in the planning as well. Okay? It also facilitates supervision of the engagement and review of the work completed. So as mentioned earlier, if the working paper should be organized in a way that it can be uh, used in facilitating the reviewer to easily review our work performed. Okay. It also indicate whether engagement objectives were achieved. So we also mentioned that there should be a disclosure, a statement there, what performance or what procedures did you perform and what are the results. So through that, we can indicate there that we achieved the engagement objective. Of course, we are guided by the engagement objective. And in order to do that, okay, the and to evidence that we achieve the engagement objective, we need to indicate there the audit procedures that will align in the achievement of our objective, and of course the actual documentation ng ginawa nating procedures, okay, and the results, okay. Also, it provides the principal support for the internal auditor's communication to the auditee. Any communication that we will be having to our audit client or auditee, no, it is strong. I mean, it should be strongly supported by the audit working papers that we have. So, in case the audit client has a question, we can directly refer only to our working paper. Okay, that we have a documentation here indicating that we really perform the audit procedures and the results of our audit procedures and the conclusions we reach. Of course, we will not be showing the working paper to our audit client, but rather um, the chief audit executive and the audit committee can uh, check whether the conclusion that we reach are supported by the working paper. Kasi we don't want everything else to be disclosed in the working paper unless may consent ng ng audit committee or ng board na talagang pwede natin ipakita only a portion of our working paper in relation dun lang sa issue na kino-question ni audit client. Okay? It can also serve as a basis, okay, for evaluating the internal audit functions quality assurance program or quality assurance and improvement program, or the QAIP. Okay? Kasi I think in the QAIP, no, nandun kasi na we need, there's an area to check if the working papers are enough evidence for the audit reports issued by the internal audit function. Okay. Also, it contributes the professional development of the internal audit staff. So remember, as a guide, or it can be a reference for the professional development of our internal audit staff. In the case we hire new internal audit staff, no, through the audit working papers, we can provide them a sample of a good working paper that shows them what should be the expected output of working paper from them. Okay? It also demonstrate the internal audit function in compliance with the Institute of Internal Auditors. Of course, we have a standard we follow in Institute of Internal Auditors through what we call uh, ISPPI, or the International Standards for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing, where in the performance standards, specifically, working paper is important or is an integral part of the support in relation to the audit report. That is why it will really demonstrate the internal audit function as in compliance with the IIA. Okay? The content of internal audit engagement working papers will depend on the nature of the engagement. That is very true. No, of course, with the if your audit engagement is simple, you can expect that the audit working paper is also as simple. No, now if you have complex and technical transactions, expect that your audit working paper will be very comprehensive and would require let's say for example if it involves heavy calculation, you expect that the working paper will contain also heavy calculation of uh amounts, no, particularly if we are doing recalculation procedures. Okay, they should always, however, provide complete, accurate, and concise documentation of the engagement process. That is why there should be a review or supervision of the documentation or the working paper. Okay?